than the ones that are being said, while there are also like differences. So I thought it was fascinating in that regard. So
yeah,
I
it's
do.
very much like a Dare commercial or that meme where the guy's trying to offer you weed and it's like, please, bro, you got to smoke this, bro. No, that's indica. This is sativa, bro. It's a different strain, bro. Please, please, please. You know, being on the American right is very much like that, where a bunch of thought leaders are each trying to get you to do a different psychedelic, and each one is offering you like a different reason. Like, please, bro, this will clear your nihilism, bro. Please, you know, it'll make you better at coding, dude. Please, I'm begging you. This is different, bro. Please try it.
It's interesting you bring that up too, because you talk more about Charles Taylor and the book Secular Age, and almost this reignition of like him using a term called reenchantment, which is like a modern term that was coined. And I liked how in the first article you kind of took the bull by the horn, where you just said what Taylor fails to understand is this: all this magic stuff's 100% fake, without a single exception. The people in the past were too stupid, ignorant, deluded, or brainwashed to pick it up. And then you just go down the list showing like, hey, this is actually a pretty modernist thing. This isn't like some ancient guru wisdom from like, let's say the Eastern Orthodox in the mountains type thing.
Yes, and I should also clarify, Charles Taylor is a perfectly intelligent person, and Charles Taylor is not himself pushing psychedelics on people. Rather, this reenchantment, disenchantment idea is then being used to justify this use of drugs. I mean, I have a problem with Charles Taylor in that he is religious and I am not, but I do not think that he is part of the problem that this article and this article series is meant to discuss.
Okay, sounds good. I'm sure we're going to get it down the road, but a quick question. You see the right, mainly in political streams normally. We went from the Nixon era and then Reagan of like a very hard stance against drugs and the war on drugs. When do you think that was like a kind of a shift or a change culturally for this?
When did conservatives start pushing psychedelic drugs?
Yeah, what would you say in like, I guess the modern term, because I know the CIA, like we're going to get to that later in the podcast, was already messing with that stuff. But
I would say it started in earnest sometime around COVID. That really kicked it into gear, because that is when you saw the importation of pharma skepticism, anti-vaccine stuff into the right. And so I think that was like the inflection point. I know the first time that I had heard people making the case for these drugs was I forgot to libertarianism in 2012 or maybe a little beforehand for Ron Paul. And actually maybe it was a little after, sometime between 2009 and in the first Obama, the first one of the Obama administration. And a major personality at that time was a guy named Adam Kokesh, who was a member of Iraq Veterans Against the War, fought in Fallujah. He probably still does do activism with Code Pink. And he was always talking about, I'm trying to remember what his drug of choice was. I do believe that Adam Kokesh was into salvia and psilocybin. And he was always talking about how different psychedelic drugs were critical to preserving his mental state because of all of the various crimes that he admitted that he perpetrated while he was in Fallujah. So that was my first time sort of hearing about drugs in this way. And again, because that was simply Adam Kokesh being weird, and I understood, reasonably well that the libertarian movement is full of those kinds of weirdos, I just buried that, right? I was like, okay, that's just an interesting thing about Adam Kokesh. A lot of people who are into libertarianism, especially in those days, in the Free State Project and so on, again, that culture has changed a little bit, were into drugs. There was a whole entrapment scandal that went through, well, no names, but the Free State Project and certain radio shows affiliated with it had some things happen, starting with entrapments or just sting operations based on drugs, which is actually probably one of the major reasons, just if nothing else, why you should not do drugs, is that people who do drugs are a danger to any organization that they're in because they attract the attention of law enforcement. Everybody commits 3 felonies a day, as the saying goes. And so any organization that allows people to do drugs is probably going to attract government attention just for that. If they're already getting government attention, that's an in for infiltration. And the kinds of people who will join an organization with people like you will be inherently people who are not good at assessing risk.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. What would you say about I know in the first article you written about, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam McCall was his name? And the 3-part series of use of psychedelics as viewed from the right?
Oh yeah, Sam McCall's article in I Am 1776, yes.
What would you say? Did that shock you, like reading the results in that? Because I saw you were pretty bold in your response, being like, "This is some noble savage stuff." Sorry to human sacrifices will stop type mentality. Do you want to comment or elaborate more on that?
Yes. Well, by the time I got to that, I was not surprised. This article was originally written as one giant article at first, but then sometime around breaking like in the tens of thousands of words, a few friends of mine said, "Marcel, you have to split this up." And I don't remember what got me to the IM 776 thing. But no, by that time, I was not surprised to read it. I was just annoyed. I think I was directed to it. I think by that point, I was looking at Cernovich. And I think Cernovich is what led me to this. Because McHall was the one talking about the proper liturgical frameworks. Christianity is a scuba suit. Like you're turning on the Geller field before you go into the warp. Before you go into this demon realm, make sure that you first you get down on your knees, then you say your rosaries, bow your head with great respect,
Yeah, I get that. What would you say, though, to a larger audience? Because I know, for example, the other night, I'm not going to say a person's name, you got an argument with a gentleman who was that religious, psychedelic bro. And he was critiquing, saying,
in fairness to that guy, he was not telling you to do psychedelics. So I would say this. One, when you read something, right? This article demonstrates why the person we're talking about, why that person's position is dangerous. Look, barring the facts of it, just temporarily stepping out whether that spirits are real. Saying that these things put you in touch with the spiritual, but you shouldn't do it because it's dangerous, is a total non-starter if you are Christian, because any Christian knows that you have a friend against whom no weapon shall prosper, right? So saying like, oh, be careful because of these spiritual entities. So any Christian would say, well, hang on a second. I'm protected from all hostile spiritual entities, right? And so any person of like moderate curiosity will just ask the question like, well, what if I make sure that I'm properly protected then? Can I do it? And you might be able to get into a dialogue saying like, well, that would be like saying, if I'm strong enough in my faith, can I make human sacrifices to pagan gods? Like, if one is true, you wouldn't do the other. You might be able to, but either way, this is a mode of thought that is even allowed on the table. So just on its own, separate from the truth, you shouldn't say things like this. Second, the stuff's not real, right? None of these things are real. And, people were saying, the very fact that atheists take these drugs, come out of them and think that the delusions they arrived at while they were on drugs are real. And they're taking this as evidence of the divine. And this is, again, I haven't used this argument in many, many years because I've sort of outgrown his phase. But this is like a really insane level of God of the gaps, right? At this point, now you're like, people used to make fun of Bill O'Reilly, oh, tide goes in, tide goes out, can't explain that. But now we're like, yo, when I drink South American tree sap, I see ghosts. Can you explain that, atheist? It almost insults your intelligence to even have to engage in it. And so what I would more deeply tell is that I really don't need to explain why you shouldn't take psychedelic drugs to get in touch with God or ghosts or anything like that. Everybody just living in our liberal Western society should understand, in theory, why that's wrong. And on a more important meta level, anybody who tells you otherwise should be mistrusted. Anybody who tells you otherwise, you should be immediately suspicious of them. Everything they say is immediately called into question. And that's another issue. Not only should you do it, but most people who are not you, right? People who are not in whatever local right-wing network you're in, just normal people will, you already have, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already have enough weird sounding right-wing views that are off-putting to people. It will not help you at all to tell people that you arrived at some of these conclusions by microdosing LSD, right? That cannot possibly help you. You are only burning credibility. And, you're putting yourself in like a private world of just total nonsense, right? When you do these drugs, that like the reality is you're putting yourself in a private world of total nonsense. Even if somehow you allow yourself to be convinced that that's not true, everybody else will think that that is true. And that should be a strong, strong reason for you to think twice and then 3 times again before you let somebody like put it in your head that your life will be improved by doing drugs.
I'm actually kind of curious because I know the first article was tailored specifically. You said like